Hello, Luke here. I hope you've had a fantastic week so far. In this demo, we're going to set up an Ansible control node on Windows Server 2022 using the Windows Subsystem for Linux. This is part of our Getting Started with Ansible blog series over at automatesql.com. I'll put a link to the post down in the description. Real quick before we get started, if you're like me, you may be having difficulty determining which tasks you should automate. Do you spend enough time to justify looking into automation? Is the task repetitive enough? I created a time tracker workbook in Excel to help identify where I spend most of my time throughout a given week. And after a few weeks, I take a look at the dashboard that's included in the workbook to help me identify which task I'm spending the most time on and if that task should be automated. Chances are, if it's repetitive enough, there's a script or a tool that can help you. This is free to download, and I'll put a link to it down in the description as well. Let's get started. So here I've swapped over to my virtual lab. It's just VMware Fusion running on a Windows or a Mac OS. This Mac is from 2019, so still has the Intel processor, and I can still run Windows Server. The lab consists of two Windows servers, Windows Server 2022s, and one Red Hat Enterprise Linux, all running evaluation editions. Red Hat Enterprise Linux I downloaded from the developers subscription. So I'm going to go ahead and start my machines just using Vagrant. And we're going to focus on SRV1 today. In later post, we'll be using all three machines. So let's jump into SRV1, and I'm going to go full screen here so it's a little bit easier to see. If you're following along on the blog post, just jump down to the section installing Ansible on the control node. All of the commands and everything that we'll be using will be outlined there. So the first thing to check is to make sure that your Windows Server 2022 is up to date. And I just installed, I believe I installed the updates yesterday, so we should be good on this system, but I'll go ahead and just bring up the server manager, go into local server, and take a look at Windows updates. Yeah, yesterday at 6:19, so we're going to go ahead and jump into PowerShell and install the Windows Subsystem for Linux. The Ansible control node will not run directly on Windows, so you've got to set up the subsystem for Linux. By default, Ubuntu will be installed as the distribution. Now you can change that by adding the -d flag to this command, but we're just going to go with the default. So to install, it's WSL --install, and then hit enter. After a few minutes after the installation is complete, we'll need to restart, and then we'll begin the installation of Ansible. All right, actually, once the server restarts and is back online, Ubuntu will be installed. We'll then update Ubuntu and then install Ansible. All right, let's go ahead and restart. If you haven't done so already and you're following along, go ahead and log in. And then after a few seconds, you should get this window downloading and installing Ubuntu. Depending on your internet connection, could take a little bit longer. But once this completes, you'll be prompted to enter in a new username and password. I'll go ahead and enter my username and password. and we'll go ahead and update Ubuntu. Once that's complete, we'll go ahead and set up a PPA, or a personal package archive. This is where we're going to download Ansible from, and ensures that we've got the correct version of Ansible, versus just using the default repository. So here's where we add the repository. And now we're ready to install Ansible. I'm going to go ahead and install pip. It's just a package manager for Python. We'll use it to install Ansible lint, which helps us whenever we're creating our Ansible playbooks. Checks the syntax and everything in Visual Studio Code is where I use it, but you can use it at the command line just to check different YAML files. We'll get into that later in a later blog post. But I do like to go ahead and get it installed. Let's go ahead and add Ansible to our path. And check our version. So we can see we've got Ansible 2.15.4 installed. Our default config file is located in this directory. And we've got our Python version as well. Now we're going to use pip to install Ansible lint. And we're going to check the version of Ansible lint. Again, make sure you use pip to download Ansible lint, because if you just grab this from the default Ubuntu repositories, it's going to be the wrong version. If you just use sudo apt-get ansible-lint, then it'll be a much older version than 6.19, at least at the time of this recording. All right, so that's the install of Ansible. I am going to go ahead and install Visual Studio Code, just so that you can see how you can connect to your WSL environment. And of course, we're going to go through the setup of Edge. If anyone knows of a way to skip this part, please let me know. Maybe it's something that we can configure with Ansible in a later video to default Edge, set up a default Edge configuration to keep it from doing this. I don't know. Once it's downloaded, go ahead and open it. This is a fairly quick install, but once you first open Visual Studio Code, you'll see that it knows that WSL is installed and asks if you'd like to install the WSL extension. There are two extensions to install, the WSL extension and the Ansible extension. We'll go ahead and launch it. And you'll notice down here it says you have Windows Subsystem for Linux installed on your system. Do you want to install the recommended extension from Microsoft for it? We'll go ahead and install that. It is installed. You'll notice this new icon here, Remote Explorer. We'll go ahead and click on that. It already knows that we have Ubuntu installed in WSL, so let's go ahead and click it, and then click the arrow here to connect. You'll notice here, starting VS Code in WSL, it's going to go ahead and set up the code server. It'll do that the first time you connect, and then subsequent connections should be a lot quicker. You'll notice here also that you're connected to WSL Ubuntu. Now you can change that. If you had multiple distributions installed, you could change it. All right, our next step is to install the Ansible extension. So just click on the extensions in the left sidebar and just search for Ansible. And go ahead and install it. So this extension does include Lightspeed. It's a generative AI service that helps developers or sysadmins create Ansible content efficiently. You'll need either a Red Hat account or a GitHub account to enable Lightspeed. All right, it is installed, and we'll go ahead and click this gear icon here to configure it. And then go down to extension settings. Scroll down, and we're going to go ahead and enable Lightspeed. Checking here and here. And then once we're done with that, just go ahead and click on the Ansible extension over here on the left. Click connect. And then here you'll get this pop up. Go ahead and accept it. Let's click connect again. Yeah, there we go. Wants to sign in using Ansible Lightspeed. Click allow. And then open. It's going to open up this site. And I'm going to log in using my Red Hat developer account. And I'll click authorize. And I'll go ahead and click this, check this box, click open. And do not ask again for this extension, click open again. Now you can see we're logged in. We go ahead and switch to Explorer and then open folder. We'll go ahead and open up our folder in WSL. You can see that we're inside Ubuntu, and that's our folder structure inside my home directory. I'll usually go and create an Ansible folder, and then that's where I'll put my inventory and all of my playbooks. So let's go ahead and just create a folder. Just call it getting started. And I won't go into setting up an inventory or a playbook in this demo, but we can jump into the terminal. we can see that we're in Ubuntu, and we can go ahead and just run Ansible-version and see that we have access to Ansible. So congratulations, you have Ansible installed inside of Windows Subsystem for Linux. In the next couple of posts, we'll be going over how to set up an inventory file and then get into creating a few playbooks. We will also cover how to set up Windows to allow connectivity from Ansible using WinRM. And yeah, I hope you found this useful, and check back soon for the next post in this series. And don't forget to download the time tracker workbook if you're having trouble just identifying those tasks that you need to know if they're good candidates for automation or if you should focus elsewhere. Thanks a lot.